Subcommittee on Emergency Preparedness, Response, and Recovery will come to order. The subcommittee is meeting today to receive testimony on state and local perspectives on DHS preparedness grant programs. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare the subcommittee in recess at any point. Let me officially say good afternoon to all of you. I would like to start by recognizing that this is my first Emergency Preparedness, Response, and Recovery Subcommittee hearing for the 117th Congress and my first hearing as chair for the subcommittee. I am pleased to be joined by my colleague and fellow Floridian ranking member Kate Kamek. We both hail from a state that has experienced many natural disasters. We can attest to the importance of emergency preparedness and use our experiences to conduct meaningful oversight of the Department of Homeland Security. We are here today to discuss the Department of Homeland Security's preparedness grant programs. These grant programs were created following one of the nation's darkest moments, the September 11th terrorist attacks. We all remember that tragic day and took the lives of so many. I was assigned to the Orlando International Airport as a police commander in charge of the police division of the Orlando Police Department at that time. We learned many lessons that day and the months and years to follow about our readiness to respond to all threats. Through the Homeland Security grant programs, the department's premier grant suite, DHS has made important investments to elevate the nation's homeland security posture. These programs provide federal assistance to fill gaps related to state, local, tribal, and territorial governments' ability to effectively prepare for, respond to, recover from, and mitigate terrorist attack. This is especially so for the Urban Area Security Initiative URASI program and the State Homeland Security Grant Program. Programs states rely on to build and maintain critical infrastructure and capabilities to keep our communities, our states, and our nation safe. URASI funding is particularly critical to the congressional district I represent, Florida 10. With Central Florida being home to millions of domestic and international tourist destinations, including world-renowned theme parks and attractions, it is essential that our first responders have the training, equipment, and other resources needed to perform their job during the most challenging times. Presently, Orlando's strong security posture is due in part to URASI funding that has helped to provide first responders with the tools and training they need to fulfill their primary mission, to keep our residents and visitors to our region safe. Having served as a law enforcement officer for almost 3 decades, I understand the tough job of our first responders, police and fire and others, and believe in the importance of continued robust federal support for grant programs that assist them in their work. President Trump consistently proposed significant cuts to the DHS preparedness grant programs that, if enacted, would have resulted in the tremendous loss of important homeland security capabilities that this country has invested in for years. Thankfully, Congress worked to ensure that cuts to these programs did not take place, but rather enacted increases in these programs. I look forward to working with the Biden administration to ensure that DHS preparedness grant programs continue to maintain robust funding, enabling us to meet the moment and boldly respond to any threat facing our nation. In the nearly 20 years since the September 11th terrorist attack, the threats against our nation are ever present, but we now see additional threats that were not as prevalent when the preparedness grant program was first established. Rather than foreign radical extremism being the predominant threat, it is now domestic terrorism, a fact evidenced by the January 6th insurrection at the U.S. Capitol. Unfortunately, this rise in domestic terrorism has also put nonprofit organizations at risk, prompting them to struggle to secure their facilities with extremely tight budgets and underscoring the need for them to have access to DHS funding. I would like to commend Chairman Thompson on the critical work he has done to help secure nonprofit organizations from terrorist attack through the Securing American Nonprofit Organizations Against Terrorist Attack, which is now law. While the evolution of the threat landscape requires DHS preparedness grant programs to evolve with it, it is important that stakeholder perspectives are considered and incorporated into changes to the grant program, including changes DHS made in the fiscal year 2020 and fiscal year 2021 budget. I am pleased that the department has the interest in ensuring preparedness dollars are spent how and where they are needed most, and that Secretary Mayorkas has acknowledged the need to assess how these grant programs can be improved. While I look forward to working with the Biden administration to improve the grant programs, it is also the role of this subcommittee through its oversight function to hold them accountable. I am pleased that we have assembled this expert panel of stakeholders to assist us in that effort. I look forward to your testimony today about how grant programs are used to strengthen your communities, the effect of the recent changes to the programs in fiscal year 2020 and 2021, and the future of the grant programs. It is now my pleasure to recognize the ranking member of this subcommittee, the gentlewoman from the great state of Florida, Ms. Kamek, for an opening statement.
Well, thank you to my fellow Floridian and Chairwoman Val Demings. It's a very exciting time for us to be hosting our very first subcommittee hearing. And I think this is historic that we have two Floridian women that are spearheading this subcommittee. So I look very much forward to working with you. As we all know, this year marks the 20th anniversary of September 11th, the worst terrorist attack on American soil. As our nation watched the events of that date unfold, we saw firsthand the countless emergency responders who rushed towards the danger without a second thought, risking their lives, and sadly, many made the ultimate sacrifice to save the lives of others. That tragic day in 2001 highlighted the invaluable role that first responders play in communities all across America. From responding to major terrorist attacks and detection of weapons of mass destruction to security screening operations and fire suppression activities, we rely on our first responders to keep us safe each and every day. FEMA's preparedness grants provide state, local, tribal, and territorial governments the ability to build, sustain, and improve capabilities necessary to prepare for and protect against, respond to, recover from, and mitigate hazards at the local level. Preparedness grant dollars enable the funding of necessary training, exercises, information sharing initiatives, community awareness campaigns, and the purchasing of vital equipment, among other items. In my home state of Florida, Urban Area Security Initiative grants funded a boat for the Tampa Police Department to regularly conduct patrols within the Port of Tampa Bay to increase port security and deter criminal and terrorist activity. I have myself witnessed this equipment in action, and it is truly a necessity to keep our communities safe. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement conducted a grant-funded statewide cyber training for IT security managers and high-tech crime investigators to help determine the effectiveness of their information security defenses. And in 2019, State Homeland Security Grant Program funds were spent to purchase anti-vehicle barriers as a pilot project for Florida's Northeast Regional Domestic Security Task Force. Port security grant programs funds were utilized by Florida law enforcement to attend the Maritime Tactical Operations Training Program at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, also known as FLETC, where they learn tactical boarding procedures, tactical water survival, and vessel clearing and shooting from an unstable platform. In a state like Florida with 14 deep water ports, it's critical that this training is readily available for all of our first responders. And bringing it a little bit closer to home, my husband, Matt, is a firefighter, paramedic, and SWAT medic. And the Assistance to Firefighter Grants, AFG, has provided financial assistance directly to eligible firefighter departments, such as his, emergency medical service, EMS organizations, and state fire training academies for critical training and equipment. The AFG program enhances response capabilities to more effectively protect the health and safety of our first responders and the public with respect to fire and fire related hazards. The importance of these grant programs cannot be understated. However, as the threat environment changes, it is important that these grant systems evolve and adapt to emerging challenges and become more responsive to the needs of first responders and our local communities. It has come to my attention through daily interactions with first responders in my district that grant monies are oftentimes not allowed to fund essential equipment necessary to keep our local first responders safe. As new technology becomes available, it is important that allowable uses of these funds remain flexible to best serve these everyday heroes. Furthermore, I think it is important that these grant programs and applying to receive funds is more accessible and quote unquote user friendly for smaller and more rural emergency responder departments. The threats that our communities face is widespread and not everyone has available resources to staff solely dedicated to staff the dedicated process of the grant application process. We must ensure that all of our first responders have the tools they need to get the job done and to keep us safe. Preparedness grants that support our states, urban areas, ports, transit systems, fire services, and nonprofits are crucial to maintaining capabilities, providing training, and purchasing equipment for the overall protection of our communities and way of life. I am proud to support these programs that strengthen our nation's overall emergency preparedness posture. Thank you very much to my colleague, Chairwoman Demings, for holding this important hearing today. And I very much look forward to hearing from our witnesses on the necessity of these grant programs and how can better support these initiatives. We need to continue to enhance the critical safety and security initiatives to keep our communities safe. So I look forward to the recommendations to improve the grants going forward. And thank you to all our witnesses again for your testimony here today. And with that, I yield back.
The chair thanks the ranking member. Members are also reminded that the committees will operate according to the guidelines laid out by the chairman and ranking member regarding remote procedures. Without objection, members not on the subcommittee shall be permitted to sit and question the witnesses. It is now the chair's pleasure to recognize the chairman of the full committee, the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Thompson, for an opening statement.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And let me say, before I give my formal talk, how happy I am that the two ladies from Florida are running the show. You both are doing a wonderful job, and Florida could not be better represented by the two of you. So let me formally thank you as subcommittee chair and ranking member for holding today's hearing on the Department of Homeland Security's Preparedness Grant. The committee has always prioritized oversight of Homeland Security grants, and I'm glad that the subcommittee is starting this Congress with such a critical hearing. The Homeland Security Grant Program, also commonly referred to as Preparedness Grants, was created nearly 20 years ago after the September 11th terrorist attack revealed gaps in our national emergency preparedness. It was apparent the federal government needed to do more to provide critical resources directly to our first responders and state and local government, which is why Congress created the State Homeland Security Program and Urban Area Security Initiative Program, along with other grant programs. These programs have proven to be critical resources over the last 2 decades. While state and local governments have made great strides in their preparedness capabilities, we must recognize that the threat landscape is ever evolving and the threats we now face have expanded considerably to include rising incidents of domestic terrorism to cyber attacks. As the threats to our nation continues to evolve, so too must the Homeland Security Preparedness Grant programs. Nearly 20 years ago, we focused our grants primarily on combating terrorism from abroad. Now, some of the most dangerous threats we face as a nation are homegrown, lone offenders, and small groups of individuals who commit acts of violence motivated by domestic extremist ideological benefits. In fact, in recent years, houses of worship and other nonprofits have been targets of violence. That is why I was pleased when my bill, the American Nonprofit Organizations Against Terrorism Act, was signed into law last year. The law authorized critical grant funding to nonprofits and faith-based organizations to help secure their facilities against terrorist attacks. I'm glad that former President Trump's proposed cuts to existing preparedness grants funding failed due to bipartisan opposition from members of Congress. Those cuts, if enacted, would have been devastating for our nation and would have hindered our ability to keep America safe. I hope to hear from our witnesses today about how DHS grants have aided them as they make their communities safer and how we can ensure the programs best secure our states and cities from terrorist threats. I look forward to working with the Biden administration and my colleagues in continuing to support communities in the fight against all forms of terrorism in our homeland. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I yield back.
Thank you so much to our chairman. It is now my pleasure to welcome our panel of witnesses. Our first witness is Ohio Governor David Ige, appearing on behalf of the National Governors Association. Governor Ige was sworn in as the 8th governor of the state of Hawaii on December 1st of 2014. Prior to becoming governor, he served in the Hawaii legislature for almost 30 years. Before that, Governor Ige had a career as an electrical engineer and a project manager. Our second witness is the director of New Jersey's Office of Homeland Security and Preparedness, Jared Maples. Mr. Maples has served in that capacity since 2017 and served as the federally designated Homeland Security Advisor to the governor, in addition to serving as the cabinet level executive responsible for coordinating and leading New Jersey's counterterrorism, cybersecurity, and emergency preparedness efforts. Mr. Maples has testified before the subcommittee on multiple occasions, and I want to thank him for again being willing to provide us with his insight on these very important topics. Our third witness, certainly no stranger to me, the chief of the Orlando Police Department, Orlando Rolon. He's appearing on behalf of the Major Cities Chiefs Association. Chief Rolon started with the Orlando Police Department in 1992, and having previously served with him while I was in his position, I am well aware of what a dedicated public servant he is. Chief Rolon, it is great to have you with us. I know your testimony will be invaluable for this subcommittee. Thank you. Finally, I understand that Ranking Member Kamet would like to introduce our final witness, Battalion Chief of the Ocala Fire Rescue, Robert Altman.
Well, thank you, Chairwoman Demings. I am very, very proud to introduce today a constituent of mine, Mr. Robert Altman. Mr. Altman is a 31-year veteran of Ocala Fire Rescue. After serving as a captain for 18 years, Mr. Altman was promoted to battalion chief in 2019. And throughout his career with Ocala Fire Rescue, Mr. Altman has played integral roles with special operations and urban search and rescue teams responding to numerous disasters. As a member of the International Association of Firefighters, Mr. Altman was selected to participate in the peer review process for FEMA's Assistance to Firefighters Grants Program, or AFG as we all know them, where I am sure the knowledge that he has gained from his extensive career is very welcome and appreciated here today, as he has helped review thousands of applications. I really appreciate Mr. Altman for his continued service to our community, and I'm so pleased that he is able to testify here today and represent the Gator Nation. I had to throw that in there. So thank you, Rob. Appreciate you. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you so much, Ranking Member, and thank you so much, Chief Altman, for being with us today. And that comes from a Florida State Seminole. Without objection, the witnesses' full statements will be inserted in the record. I now ask each witness to summarize their statements for 5 minutes, beginning with Governor Ige. Governor?
Good morning and aloha from Hawaii. Thank you so much, Chairwoman Demings, Chairman Thompson, and Ranking Member Kamek for this opportunity. I'm representing the National Governors Association, the bipartisan voice of the nation's governors, comprising the 55 states, territories, and commonwealths. Where appropriate, I will also add my perspective as governor of the state of Hawaii. For example, we learned much in 2018 as we concurrently responded to and managed the recovery from the Kilauea eruption and the wettest tropical cyclone ever recorded in Hawaii and the nation. And we're still dealing with the unique challenges our island state faces from the COVID-19 pandemic. My testimony will focus on 4 main areas: cybersecurity, FEMA programs, preventing targeted violence, and COVID-19 challenges and lessons learned. My written testimony provides additional information in each of these areas. First, I'd like to discuss cybersecurity. As former co-chairman of the Council on Governors, a bipartisan group of governors that work with the administration on key national security issues, I work with my peers and federal partners from the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Defense, and the White House on several cyber initiatives over the past 2 years. One area that needs continued work is addressing the complexity of authorities related to cybersecurity. Specifically, governors have asked DHS and DOD to better define the roles and responsibilities at the federal level related to response efforts during a cybersecurity event. In addition, the NGA has called on Congress to create a dedicated state and local cybersecurity grant program. And finally, we strongly urge Congress to include cybersecurity in any national infrastructure plan or legislative package. With respect to FEMA programs, governors must prepare for, respond to, and recover from man-made and increased occurrences of catastrophic natural disasters. Much of our ability to do this comes through the FEMA grant funding. Governors remain concerned that current funding levels are insufficient. Ongoing dedicated federal support is crucial. Another area of concern is that FEMA's preparedness grants prescribe where 20% of the funding must go. Governors have concern that continued carve-outs hurt overall efforts. We look forward to working with DHS Secretary Mayorkas on this issue. I also want to note NGA's concerns about FEMA's proposed rule titled Cost of Assistance Estimates in Disaster Declaration Process for the Public Assistance Program. The time and manner in which these changes have been proposed will unduly burden state, territorial, and local governments as they continue responding to and recovering from disasters, both COVID and non-COVID related. Combating the rise in domestic violent extremism and preventing acts of targeted violence are serious issues. Through a 2-year grant from the Department of Homeland Security, the NGA worked with 5 states to develop statewide multidisciplinary strategies to prevent targeted violence. With NGA's guidance, Hawaii created a multidisciplinary team focused on education, and we plan to establish a threat assessment team focused on healthcare infrastructure. There is no one-size-fits-all solution, but the work done by the NGA Center is a great starting point and resource for decision makers at both the state and federal level. I will conclude with these observations and lessons learned from COVID-19. During COVID, two key issues arose within FEMA and DHS for governors: eligibility for under public assistance and the federal state cost share requirements. Written testimony details the challenges we've experienced in these areas, and I want to focus on our recommendations. Federal funding needs to be immediate, accessible, and flexible enough to address emerging needs for critical materials during this ongoing crisis. In addition, NGA calls for a simplification of the public assistance eligibility requirements to ensure efficiency and simplicity. The work and service of the National Guard has been critical this past year, and NGA has called for a review of a legislative solution for the use of Title 32 for large-scale disasters and pandemics. In addition, the FEMA mission assignment process should be reviewed to ensure a better coordinated, streamlined, and rapid responsive system. Thank you so much for this opportunity to share with you. Aloha.
Thank you so much, Governor Ige, for your testimony. I now recognize Director Maples to summarize his statement for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman. And Chairwoman Demings and Ranking Member Kamek, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. It is an honor to speak with you and share the work my office is doing to keep our residents, visitors, and institutions of New Jersey safe, especially with regard to Homeland Security grants and emergency preparedness. The New Jersey Office of Homeland Security and Preparedness, NJOHSP, is tasked with coordinating the state's counterterrorism, cybersecurity, and emergency preparedness efforts across all levels of government, law enforcement, nonprofit organizations, and the private sector. As New Jersey faces complex security challenges driven by evolving threats, we know these threats neither start nor end at our state's borders. Last year brought compounded challenges to our country. Like other states, we were not immune to the devastating effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. New Jersey is the most densely populated state in the nation, increasing the difficulty of containing a widespread respiratory virus. We took actions necessary to slow the spread of COVID-19, bolster our hospital capabilities, and support our communities. As the fight continues, we remain appreciative for the federal government's support. Since the beginning of the pandemic, we witnessed humanity and kindness in our society. Unfortunately, on January 6th, there was also an unacceptable attack on our democracy and its institutions, resulting from the culmination of an existing domestic threat that has been pervasive in our country for some time. New Jersey's analytical capabilities have focused on domestic extremism and the threat it presents. We were one of the first states in the nation to sharpen focus on groups in the United States perpetuating extreme ideologies meant to motivate individuals to violent action. We observed that COVID-19 restrictions, disinformation, and misinformation would converge with the 2020 presidential election and mounting civil unrest nationwide. Specifically, we saw foreign or domestic extremists, foreign terrorist organizations, and nation-state threat actors attempting to leverage disinformation to hinder economic recovery and vaccination efforts, fuel anti-government sentiment, and spread false narratives to sow discord throughout the United States. In response, we increased our efforts beginning in March 2020 to combat these inaccuracies and provide up-to-date information and guidance to the public. In September, we released a threat assessment detailing how the convergence of COVID-19 pandemic, civil unrest, and the presidential election influenced the national threat landscape. This year brings with it an unfortunate milestone for our nation, the 20th anniversary of September 11th, 2001. For the past 20 years, the Homeland Security paradigm has evolved through proactive strategy and reactive operations. The focus on public safety remains the same, but tactics and strategies change with new lessons learned or priorities identified. With the new administration, we see policy adaptations that will affect state and local programs moving forward. Whereas one administration may have stringent investment priorities for grants or fewer risk-based jurisdictional awards, others broaden discretion and expand the risk-based jurisdictional grants. Ultimately, we recognize that all of us in this discipline are working toward the same goals and objectives. We encourage the administration and DHS to sharpen its focus on risk-based decision-making as program priorities are developed. Through risk-informed processes, collaboration with state Homeland Security leaders on future mandated programs, and grant allocations, which allow for advanced planning to occur with new priorities rather than waiting on an annual notice of funding opportunity and having only the application submission window to impart federal planning priorities. As a state with a high-risk urban area, we support the UASI program and welcome continued risk-informed decisions about funding allocations, priorities, and expansion of jurisdictions. We also appreciate the federal government's attempts to broaden resources provided into other programs such as targeted violence prevention. Collaboration with the states will strengthen these programs and help inform where both financial and programmatic resources will be most efficiently invested. Lastly, we recognize that threats in the cyber realm are both an end target and a vector through which other consequences may manifest. It is why our preparedness posture focuses on integrated threats with a goal of agnostic consequence management. With this approach in mind, we welcome conversations with DHS and about dedicated funding or for prioritization about cybersecurity. In conclusion, the last year has highlighted many of the challenges for which our nation's preparedness must improve. Whether focusing on supply chain resiliency, the criticality of functions that drive our markets and economy, or the services that support our way of life, we must constantly adapt. We have spent the last 4 years trying to position New Jersey for these evolutions. In that vein, we applaud DHS's movement towards critical functions and away from a singular focus on infrastructure assets. And we appreciate the sharpened focus on collective capabilities and priorities for the grant programs. Chairwoman Dennings, Ranking Member Kamek, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, including Congressman Payne and Congresswoman Watson-Coleman, are great champions and partners. I thank you again for the opportunity to testify today. I look forward to your questions and yield back to the chairwoman.
Thank you so much, Mr. Maples. The chair now recognizes the Orlando Police Chief, Chief Rolon, to summarize his statement for 5 minutes.
Chairwoman Demings, to participate in today's hearing. Can you hear me?
Chief, you're a little in and out, but we can hear you now.
It is an honor to appear before the panel led by 2 representatives from the state of Florida. Chairwoman Demings, who is a friend and a former chief of police here at the department where I have the privilege to lead, and the ranking member, Kamek, who knows firsthand the sacrifices first responders make. I appear before you today as the chief of the Orlando Police Department, and it is also a privilege to testify on behalf of the Major City Chiefs Association. Local law enforcement is in the front lines, whether it be responding to a terrorist attack, natural disaster, or the global pandemic. FEMA preparedness grants, especially UASI and state homeland security grant programs, provide critical resources that bolster law enforcement's ability to prevent and respond to these threats. It is worth noting that nearly every UASI eligible jurisdiction is a member of the MCCA, and robust stakeholders engagements is a must. Unfortunately, that type of engagement isn't standard or formalized. In order to ensure preparedness grants are meeting the needs of grant recipients, FEMA should solicit the local law enforcement input. As you are likely aware, FEMA considered making several changes to the fiscal year 2021 UASI and state homeland security grants. Changes related to risk determination would nearly double the number of jurisdictions eligible for UASI funding, forming FEMA to spread already limited funds. Another proposed change would have made UASI funding competitive, which would result in funding inconsistencies and favor jurisdictions that can write the best applications. Funding should be allocated based on risk and not the quality of the grant writers. I understand FEMA is still considering some of these changes. FEMA now also requires grantees to dedicate 30% of their funding to national priority areas. This is a 10% increase from last year. While national priority areas can help ensure limited grant funding is also used to address most significant threats, they must be developed in consultation with key stakeholders to ensure they accurately reflect threats. Again, this is not always the case. For example, FEMA's consultation with MCCA members while developing the national priority areas and the proposed changes to the funding formula was limited at best. I understand that Secretary Mayorkas recently instructed FEMA to host a series of stakeholder listening sessions, and the MCCA looks forward to collaborating on future grant guidance. UASI and state homeland security grant recipients often engage in years-long planning where predictability is key. There needs to be more transparency with respect to the risk validation process that is used to determine the grant allocations. While grantees are allowed to review and comment on the risk profiles, they are unable to see the specific data that was used to calculate the risk. In light of these challenges, FEMA should let personnel from each jurisdiction with the appropriate clearances see the specific data that was used to formulate the risk profile. It is also important to ensure that FEMA's risk methodology captures all the relevant factors that contribute to a grantee's risk. For example, the sheer number of tourists who visit Orlando, coupled with the fact that many of them are visiting soft targets, like our famous theme parks, represents a substantial risk that should be accounted for. Until recently, tourism-related metrics such as daily visitors and special events were not included. FEMA must continue to review and update its risk formula to properly address the needs of the jurisdictions. Although today's hearings is focused on FEMA grants, a conversation on preparedness would not be complete without touching on some recent challenges. Over the past decade, local law enforcement has become a popular target for cyber attacks. We are lucky in Orlando to have a great Chief Information Officer, Rosa Akhtar-Kabari, that understands the seriousness of these threats and has taken steps to secure our city system. This is not always the case, as we have seen ransomware attacks in Atlanta and beyond. Orlando knows just how dangerous threats like domestic terrorism can be, and the Orlando Police Department has been able to apply many of the lessons learned from the Pulse nightclub tragedy to mitigate other threats and prevent violence. The MCCA is committed to continuing to serve as a conduit between our membership, the federal government, and other key stakeholders to help build those relationships. I'd like to close by thanking the committee for its continued support of FEMA preparedness grants, and the MCCA looks forward to continuing to work closely with all of you to achieve our shared goal of securing our communities. I look forward to any questions the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chief Rolon. The chair now recognizes Chief Altman for 5 minutes. Chief?
Good afternoon, Congresswoman Demings, Ranking Member Kat Kamek, and Chairman of the committee, Mr. Thompson. I'm Robert Altman again. I'm Battalion Chief of Cal Fire Rescue, located in North Central Florida. I'm pleased to testify before your subcommittee today to discuss the importance of the Assistance to Firefighters Grant Program known as AFG. I was recently asked by Congresswoman Kamek from 3rd District to give some testimony on the Assistance to Firefighter Grant Program from my own firsthand knowledge. I also been on the Assistance to Firefighter Grants Program selected by the International Association of Firefighters for FEMA. Cal Fire Rescue, the department I work at, operates out of 7 stations providing emergency services to an estimated 61,000 full-time residents and approximately 156,000 people on an average workday. The department covers just over 47 square miles and has an automatic aid agreement with Marion County Fire Rescue to assist with emergency coverage for 1,663 square miles and over 365,000 residents. Ocala Fire Rescue has been a beneficiary of several AFG awards in the past, including one this previous year. The department was awarded a grant for hearing protection previously for apparatus, 2 grants roughly 10 years apart for self-contained breathing apparatus, known as SCBAs. We are awaiting the arrival of the new awarded SCBAs currently. Fire departments like Ocala depend on funds to make major purchases that were either not budgeted for or current financial climate would not cover the expense. Ocala Fire Rescue, like many other departments across our nation, has been struggling to recover from the financial downturn our nation previously went through. The COVID-19 pandemic has put new strains on departments that have not fully recovered. Bills like the current Senate Bill 426 Firefighter Cancer Bill will also put a financial strain on fire departments across Florida. While joining 44 other states in our country to improve firefighter safety, it has a cost to the cities and counties and departments. Departments are trying to improve the personal protective equipment of their firefighters. The new gear that is recommended to protect firefighters is costly. Some departments just don't have the resources or the budget to cover these items. This is where the AFG program helps these departments not only cover the recommendations and meet the current national fire protection standards, but also the mission of the fire department, to protect those who protect us, our firefighters. Florida firefighters are asked to perform all types of emergencies. We cover all types of economic development, from rural to urban terrain and everything in between. We respond to all natural disasters, hurricanes, hazardous materials incidents, technical rescues, fires, and emergency medical emergencies, and any other situation that the public can't handle. A perfect example of the need for the AFG's current COVID-19 pandemic we're all working through. Without the federal aid that was offered last year by the AFG, many departments just could not meet the community's needs. Service would have been cut short to the people that needed it most. Departments across the nation, like my own, are currently being asked to submit flat budgets or decrease their current budget proposals due to the cost the pandemic has put on their departments and communities. Funding that was budgeted for other critical equipment has been spent on COVID-19 response. With this unexpected pandemic and its costs, departments still need to respond to every other emergency that's out there. They still need to keep up on schedules with PPE purchases and other essential equipment that fire departments need to operate their services to the citizens. I have read numerous applications from departments all across our nation, large and small, all with the same mission and goals. The AFG not only helps those departments protect the lives and safety of the citizens, it also helps them meet their goals of firefighter safety. Without the AFG, many departments would not be able to provide adequate PPE to its firefighters to do basic fundamentals of the fire service, which is fight fire. I have read too many applications where departments do not have enough bunker gear to outfit their firefighters, so that each firefighter has his own individual turnout gear. Fire departments are driving 30-year-old emergency vehicles as frontline apparatus. Departments asking for exhaust scavenging systems for their apparatus, so firefighters and the public do not have to breathe cancer-causing fumes from emergency vehicles. The other side of the AFG is that departments are able to maintain and secure awards that can use funds to advance life safety projects that fire service offers to its citizens. Departments like mine can offer smoke detector programs, hands-only CPR programs to schools and businesses, water safety programs, community paramedic programs, just to name a few that we offer. Ocala Fire Rescue is also part of the Task Force 8, which combines USAR Task Force 8, which combines 3 local fire departments, Gainesville, Marion County. We have 28 members from our department on the regional team. We've been able to train and receive the most advanced technical equipment through the AFG award. We have responded to many emergencies throughout Florida and the southeast region of the USA. When a department receives a grant from AFG, not only does the award help their department, it helps neighboring departments by adding more resources and more up-to-date resources for those departments. In closing, being a recipient of AFG grants and as a reviewer, I can attest that the need to continue and, when possible, increase the allotted budget for AFG is greatly needed. Without these funds, many departments would be cutting services, laying off firefighters, asking firefighters to put their lives at greater risk by performing their job without adequate personal protective equipment or inadequate firefighting equipment. When the disaster strikes, local fire departments will be the first to arrive. They need the equipment to do their job safely. I'm glad the federal government recognizes the need to assist in funding these grants. These grants help local departments meet their basic needs and improve the capabilities to respond to all hazards. I thank you for the opportunity to testify today about my experience with the Assistance to Firefighter Grant Program, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Chief Altman. I want to thank all of our witnesses, this very geographically diverse panel of witnesses. I will remind the subcommittee that we will each have 5 minutes to question the panel. I will now recognize myself for questions. I'd like to begin, Chief Rolon, with you. Cities like Orlando have unfortunately found themselves, regardless of which party was in the White House, on a terribly unpredictable roller coaster, not knowing year to year whether to expect DHS grant funds to be available to maintain core counterterrorism and preparedness programs. From your perspective, Chief, how has this lack of predictability impacted Orlando's ability to be forward-leaning in addressing emerging threats?
Well, Chairwoman Demings, I think to put it in simple terms, we have been shortchanged, in my opinion, in the Central Florida region, considering that we received prior to COVID more than 76 million visitors to our region. It has been a challenge for us to solicit and secure the funding that we believe is best to not only support our local residents, but also the millions of people that come not only from the United States, but all over the world. We have learned to navigate through the system, but it has been very difficult at times. For the people who do the heavy lifting in our area that put everything together in order for us to try to compete for the funds, it has been somewhat of a struggle to show that we are deserving of more support. But we appreciate you and our congressional delegation who have made a tremendous difference in fighting for us to secure additional funds that have resulted in an increase for funding that now, just this year, will allow us to have, for the first time in our region, a high-reach rescue vehicle, one that you would have thought that here in Central Florida we would have had a long time ago. So it has been somewhat of a struggle, but we have hope moving forward through sessions like this and giving us the opportunity to communicate our concerns. We'll be able to get better funding in the future.
Thank you, Chief. Governor Ige, as a former police chief, I know firsthand of how important the Department of Homeland Security grant program is to keeping our community safe. That is why I asked all of you here today for my first hearing as chair of this subcommittee. The introduction of fiscal year 2020 of cybersecurity, soft targets, intelligence, and information sharing, and emerging threats are national priorities to be addressed by a specified portion of grant funding marked a significant change, but other consequential changes were proposed, including transforming portions of grant funding into competitive grants that were pending when the Biden administration came in. Governor, can you share your view on the impacts to states of those changes that were made in recent years, and how can the committee be thinking about where these programs need to go from here?
Thank you very much, Chairwoman Demings. I think it's very important on behalf of all the governors to advocate for maximum flexibility and reducing the earmarks because all of the states are different and we definitely have different needs. We know that the federal government has to be more active in cybersecurity. We do know it's a nationwide network, and we are only as strong as the weakest link. Clarifying and providing additional funds to improve the cybersecurity posture in every state is so necessary to increase the cybersecurity posture of the country. And many important infrastructure assets are scattered in different states. For example, here in the state of Hawaii, we are headquarters to all of the Pacific commands for the Indo-Pacific region. And any impact to our community definitely impacts the country's response to any kind of activity that would occur. So we certainly would encourage maximum flexibility. And as you had said, being able to count on grant funding is so important to improving our posture all across the country.
Governor, thank you so much. I know how early it is there in your home state as well. So again, thank you for being with us. Director Maples, the state of New Jersey has multiple jurisdictions in the URASI program. To what degree has the changes in the past few years impacted the state's preparedness, and what challenges, if any, have they presented from a grants administration standpoint?
Thank you for the question. And unfortunately, I don't have a term like aloha to use, and I won't tell you what we normally say in New Jersey, but we do have great beaches. Regarding our preparedness, our robust UASI program covers the most densely populated state in the country, most diverse by many measures. And so when we talk about preparedness in our administration of the grant program, the biggest challenge that we face is making sure that all those jurisdictions are on the same page going forward. That's one of the reasons my office exists. But then when you look at what happened to us just this past year with the rating, our rating actually went down despite us having a signature terror attack in 2019, December 2019 in Jersey City. And of course, our enduring threat, we labeled white supremacy and some of the race-based extremist issues that we're facing as a high threat. And so we have that present in our state. So making sure that those are connected. One of the other challenges I would say is because of where we are in the corridor, and the governor mentioned about infrastructure. In New Jersey, we literally sit at the heart, in the middle of Philadelphia and New York, and of course, extending the Northeast Corridor and all the infrastructure that comes with that. So making sure that our ranking is reflected in that, and then therefore allowing us to administer those grants in a way that provides across the entire state and across all of our sectors that are present here in New Jersey.
Thank you so much, Mr. Maples. The chair now recognizes the ranking member, the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Kamick.
Thank you, Chairwoman Demings. And again, thank you to all of our witnesses here today. We'll jump right in. Chief Altman, your testimony mentions that you have been selected by IAFF to review the AFG grant proposals. Can you just give a brief overview to all of our members here today of how that process works? And as a follow-up, have you found that smaller fire departments, which are oftentimes rural, have difficulties applying for the AFG grants? And if so, how can that process be improved?
Thank you, Congresswoman Kamick. Yes, about 3 years ago, the International Association of Firefighters was looking to add more people onto the FEMA grant team for AFG and for the SAFER grants. And I was recommended by that time by the FBF president over to FEMA to be selected for that board. I had to fill out a resume and a bio to get and it's kind of one of the things I believe where people stay on the board until they either retire or stop, working on that board. So I started reviewing grants roughly 3 years ago for AFG, and I have read so many grants. And usually, what happens with the rural departments, they have a harder time because they don't either pay a grant writer to write their grants, and they don't go back and forth with the information. They'll give it to maybe a lower level person inside their department to try and write the grant. They're very, it can be a very important, and it's a huge need for their department. But because they don't hit all the little check marks when we're going through and doing our review, they just won't make the cut to get the grant. And
Thank you so much for your patience. We're now ready to resume. We call this subcommittee hearing back to order. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The chair will now recognize members for questions they may wish to ask our witnesses. In accordance with the guidelines laid out by the chair and the ranking member, I will recognize members in order of seniority, alternating between majority and minority. Members are also reminded to unmute themselves when recognized for questions. The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Sheila Jackson Lee.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair, for this very important hearing, and thank you to all of the witnesses. Let me thank some of the witnesses for mentioning that the issue of security and emergency and preparedness comes in many, many forms, and for acknowledging the terrible insurrection provoked by white supremacists and insurrectionists who were there to attack members of Congress, the Speaker of the House, and the Vice President. Obviously, preparedness is important for local jurisdictions because we never know what an emergency really is. And so I am interested in that kind of flexibility in terms of not discerning what kind of emergency a jurisdiction will be encountering. So let me first of all start with Governor of Hawaii. Thank you for your presence here. And as well, the Director of Homeland Security for New Jersey. Give me just a short assessment of how important grants and response from the federal government are in a manner that allows you to respond to what is at that time an emergency. Emergencies don't send notices, and they don't give you a knock on the door, they just come. Governor?
Yes, certainly. Thank you so much for this opportunity. As you said, oftentimes we don't know what the emergency will be and what the full scope of the emergency will be. For many of the states and governors taking action to respond to emergencies, we all make a commitment of local resources, but FEMA and federal support was very, very important, especially for those catastrophic events that exceed the capacity in any given state. And I do think it's important. Some emergencies do require access to federal resources, whether it be Department of Defense or other kinds of assets that we don't have access to at the state level. It's very important. The emergency response and the way it's structured from county and local jurisdictions to state coordination to federal coordination is very important, and we continue to work to improve coordination between all levels of government. Most emergencies require an all forms of government response in order to best serve our communities.
And time is of the essence.
Yes.
Director Maple, that very same question on timeliness and expeditiously getting resources to you when an emergency comes.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Thank you for the question. And certainly no warning events are the hallmark of what we prepare for in Homeland Security. And to that end, the dollars that we get from our federal grant program go a long way for both strategic initiatives and tactical initiatives in how we operate. So whether you're looking at the Jersey City attack or Hurricane Sandy, or really down the line of a lot of these events that have happened in New Jersey over time, we dedicate the dollars for strategic, implementing programs, things like training, exercises, strategic assessments. So those threat assessments that I talked about, and the technology behind that, cybersecurity events. We do a lot of strategic investment, and then also the tactical investment, investing in the tactical gear, equipment, and training that allows our first responders to get in place. And when the governor talked about that federal interaction, pretty much any incident that happens in New Jersey is going to have some sort of a federal nexus almost immediately. And so building the relationships on the front end become a huge part of how we get through those and create resiliency. ultimately, and our goal is to stop those incidents from happening beforehand, whether they be man-made or try to mitigate the natural ones, but then also build a resilient community on the back end so that we can recover on a better footing.
Thank you, Mr. Rolon and Mr. Altman, in terms of the local impact. First of all, COVID-19 has been devastating to law enforcement, both police and firefighters. Thank you for your service. In the course of just answering my question about the importance of these grants, the DHS Preparedness Grant programs being detailed enough to be able to meet the needs of local entities such as police and fire, if you respond to that, but more importantly, what impact it has when you need PPEs for pandemics and can't access them because of the lack of dollars or the lack of access to federal grants. Chief and Battalion Chief. Chief, would you start first?
The gentlewoman's time has expired and the witnesses may very quickly and briefly answer the question. Thank you.
Very kind. I'm so sorry. I didn't see the clock. It's not showing up on me, so I apologize. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. The witnesses may give brief answers, please. Chief Altman?
Would you like me to go first?
Yeah, please go first.
Yes. Having the PPE for our firefighters is very important. We did run down to a close level 0 for a short period of time, but with our neighboring community fire departments and our hospital, they were able to keep us in support. But without the local grant funds, we wouldn't be able to keep up with the need for the amount of calls that we ran for COVID. We just would not be able to handle it.
Chief of Police, thank you. Chief Rolon?
Chief, we can't hear you. You're on mute.
Is that mute?
Now, we can hear you.
So early on, there were a lot of unknowns, and so there was a lot of concerns, and the equipment that everyone was recommending was not readily available. And thankfully, as time progressed, those needs became less, but the availability to have access to them also was facilitated. So to be honest with you, the early stages of the pandemic were nightmares. But beyond the first 3-4 months, I think everyone realized that, hey, we saw the light at the end of the tunnel, and the funding process and the support mechanism in place was exactly what we needed in order to get beyond the hump that we were facing.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Sheila Jackson Lee. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from the state of Louisiana, Mr. Higgins, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Demings and Ranking Member Kamek, for holding today's hearing. I represent much of Louisiana's Gulf Coast. So I certainly understand the importance of preparedness for disaster mitigation. It's an ongoing challenge. And I also spent many years in law enforcement, and I know that a well-funded police force is generally a well-prepared police force. And it's essential to protecting our communities and our first responders. So Department of Homeland Security grants are undoubtedly a necessity in this process, and I appreciate my friend and colleague, our chairwoman, for holding this hearing. Mr. Altman, you mentioned in your written testimony, which I've read, that the Assistance to Firefighters Grant Program has helped your department, Ocala Fire Rescue, response to natural disasters. We're particularly concerned about that. Hurricanes, hazardous materials, incidents, technical rescues, fires, medical emergencies, etc. Would you further explain to America and to the committee your experience with DHS grants assisting natural disaster response? Give us an overview there, sir, from your perspective.
Thank you, Mr. Higgins. I started on our USAR team and our Special Operations team. Originally, I started on Special Operations in the 90s and in mid-2000s when USAR came about. We've responded to everything from Katrina on forward, just about every natural disaster that's happened in the Southeast region. And that's my department. We have, we're made up, like I said, of Gainesville in Marion County. We also have Letcher County in for most part up until last year. What happens is we get the best training and for our 4 departments that can put together that the state has, that our country actually has to offer. We have the great Florida State Fire College right here in our backyard, and we teach the military from all over the world and everything right here in Ocala. So we have the most up to date. So the grants, what they've done is given us the best equipment. They've given us amount of money to do training that we would not have ever been able to afford to train any one of these departments, even with the budgets that some of the larger departments have, would not have been able to afford to do the training that we got. So when we do respond to these natural disasters, we're so much better equipped and we have so much more training than we could have had at any point without having the AFG grants. They've made it where we stepped up tenfold. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Would you concur and just clarify for everyone that's tuned in here that your grant applications and approvals are allowing you to train, but you're not just training your department. To speak to the magnification of your training impact due to the access
Of the grants?
to grant monies for training.
Sure.
How many departments come train with you?
At a minimum, we have 4. We'll have 4 big departments come train. Sometimes we have departments from all the way from Key West up through Jacksonville and all the way through the Panhandle of Florida that'll come down and train with us. So using all of the equipment that we get for our task force team, it's not just used here locally to even be trained on. It's trained throughout the whole state of Florida. It just depends on the different times. We offer different classes at different times and different training events. And at least quarterly, we all meet and get together in different areas from up in Jacksonville to Orlando. We have guys in Orlando actually that are there today because of grant funding doing training. So it's all over the whole state.
So it certainly magnifies. Would you agree, just in closing, and then I have a question for Mr. Rolon. Would you agree that the DHS grant system allows you to save lives and preserve properties, protect property, and save lives?
Absolutely, 100%.
There's a direct correlation there, is there not?
Yes, there is. Yes, there is.
Thank
Absolutely.
you, sir. God bless you. Mr. Rolon, in my remaining time, would you please advise to the state and local and law enforcement that will ultimately watch this when it comes to applying for and implementing the best use of DHS preparedness grant programs? What words of advice would you have in my remaining time? Which, Madam Chair, I cannot see the clock, but perhaps you could advise.
The gentleman's time has expired, but the witness may answer the
Oh,
question.
I apologize, Madam Chair. My time has expired, but perhaps he could answer. Thank you.
Chief, you're on mute.
I'm not controlling it there. It's all right. I wasn't controlling it, but thank you very much. I think it's critical for every community, regardless of, it's not a one fit all. Every community has to be measured by what the risks are for that community. And I think that's where, in part, sometimes we come up with these processes that say you must meet this criteria, but it's for the general market that is trying to capitalize on these grant opportunities. And maybe we need to retweak how it is that a city like ours is compared to Newark, New Jersey, and see if whatever criteria is being set for all to follow is right or not. I think, again, in our case, in our area, we have suffered as a result of it.
Thank you so much, Chief. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from the state of New Jersey, Mr. Payne, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And let me just thank you and the ranking member for this very timely committee hearing. And I will start with Mr. Maples, who I know very well and has been very helpful to this committee in the past. Mr. Maples, for the past few fiscal years, the risk ranking and funding levels for the Newark, Jersey City and New Brunswick, New Jersey, UASI jurisdictions has fluctuated, bringing an element of unpredictability to the jurisdiction's budget from fiscal year to fiscal year. An issue that I spent a lot of time of engaging with FEMA when I was chairman of this subcommittee. The question is, how has this unpredictability impacted emergency preparedness in New Jersey?
Thank you for the question, Congressman, and again, thank you for your partnership and friendship over the years. I'll say this, that unpredictability in this business, particularly when we look at strategic investments and strategic programming, is very challenging. It's a lot more efficient, and it's a lot more strategic, quite frankly, and able to develop the goals that we want to develop by having a little bit more consistency in those rankings. And when those rankings drop, for example, to your point, when some of those dollars go away, investments that we thought we were going to be able to make and some of our municipal partners were going to be able to make we have to push them back or not even do them in some cases. So those are direct impacts on things like strategic training initiatives, exercises, for some of the tactical preparations of some of the specific tactical equipment, for example. If we can't invest in those and know we have a specific funding source, that unpredictability causes a lot of problems for us to respond to those no-warning events that we've talked about.
Thank you. While in office, former President Trump consistently proposed significant cuts to DHS preparedness grants. Now that the Biden administration is at the helm of the department, please explain the importance of robust funding levels for these grant programs, including how emergency preparedness would be impacted if cuts that the Trump administration proposed were enacted. So, are you there? Are there any specific sections of DHS preparedness grant funding that you could use immediate additional support?
So thank you again for that. I think one of the biggest standout areas that we can talk about is the cybersecurity realm. Right now, there's a 7.5% dedication in the current grant streams to cybersecurity. That is an evolving threat. That's an incredibly emerging threat of a high profile, high impact to our national security, and certainly in New Jersey. Everything from ransomware incidents throughout our municipalities up to our strategic investments in critical infrastructure protection. That's one area where I think we can see, if not a dedicated grant funding stream from our DHS counterparts in the federal government, certainly an uptick in what we spend or is allocated throughout the investment matrix. And then also, when we talk about those preparedness, those efforts, I think the more preparation that we can do, the P in preparedness and OHS&P, and having those exercises, having those communication networks established, which we try to do every single day, if those dollars are increased, I think we'll see a lot of impact from an investment perspective.
Thank you, sir. And once again, it's good to see you. And thank you for always supporting us here. And with that, Madam Chair, I'll yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from Iowa, Ms. Miller Meeks, for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chair Deming and Ranking Member Kamek, and to all the witnesses for this very important hearing. It's fascinating to me, being a former director of public health, especially after the emergency preparedness and Homeland Security took place. And also, I want to thank Representative Payne for giving me an opening for my question. So this is for Mr. Director Maples. Within the state of Iowa, as a state senator, we had to advance legislation because of some of our localities and our cities, because of cybersecurity, they were ransomed and being paid in Bitcoin. And we know that China, the Chinese Communist Party, now has its own cryptocurrency and is trying to advance that. And I think that's extraordinarily troublesome and problematic for the United States. And you had mentioned, and in your written testimony, you said that you were welcoming conversations with DHS about the dedicated funding or prioritization for cybersecurity. Both state Homeland Security Grant Program and UASI recipients are required to spend 7.5% of their award on cybersecurity. And as you had just started earlier, would you be able to elaborate your thoughts on additional dedicated funding for cybersecurity?
Sure, absolutely. And one quick adjoinder to the previous question that I'd add to this, that it impacts your question as well, which is the other side really impact would be the nonprofit security grant program. I think there can be an uptick there very quickly that we'll see a lot of impact from. So I do want to make sure I mention that. From a cybersecurity perspective, I thank you for the question. It's a great one. Number one is there's been this tremendous convergence of threat that we see. And so previously, a cybersecurity incident may be isolated as a specific online or cyber environment incident. And now you see this nexus between extremism, whether it be recruiting, whether it be online pieces, ransomware, the criminal act. You see an incredible nexus from our foreign organizations, like our foreign state-sponsored organizations, like you talked about with China, that there's a real a benefit, quite frankly, to them to impact us, whether it be through causing chaos online, causing those attacks, exfiltrating information or IP. There's a huge nexus to that convergence of threat that we deal with every single day in New Jersey. So when we talk about an uptick, whether it be again in that investment percentage or in a specific and set aside grant stream for cybersecurity, a lot of it will deal with that convergence. So they have to connect. It can't just be independent of the extremism piece and a lot of the other preparation and preparedness grants that are out there. It has to be complementary. But then on a cybersecurity side, it is things like getting to small local businesses because they've become targets. They become targets of something as big as a Chinese state actor all the way down to a criminal actor on a small level. And you see huge impacts in New Jersey, and I'm sure you do in Iowa as well, from a dollar figure, from an economic impact, from a trust in the system that we can protect PII and all the information and data that's available. We can protect our networks. And so the dedicated streaming, at least in New Jersey, of course, that's what I'm speaking on behalf of. We can dedicate that funding for technology, for resources, for personnel, for access to communication platforms, to really increase our capability with the federal government to team up together to beat that convergence. So I think that's how I'd answer that one.
And I only have a little bit more time left, but I'm so glad that you brought up the issues that you brought up, because we also have disinformation from from other governments that are not friendly to the United States. And hopefully you saw the recent Wall Street Journal article talking about both the Russia and the Chinese Communist Party with their disinformation campaigns on social media to exaggerate the side effects from our vaccines for COVID-19. This is extraordinarily serious. We know we have to get through this pandemic. It's part of, I'm sure it has impacted all of you and your jobs in emergency preparedness. And your thoughts on that type of disinformation campaign by foreign leaders in the digital or internet realm.
Well, thank you for that question. That's I hate to say it's become part of our wheelhouse in New Jersey. The governor and I spoke very early in the pandemic, and we realized there was a problem. And one of those was a state-sponsored. I didn't want to get into the specific details, but a state-sponsored actor started a text message string that started, we really believe, started some of the panic around that first March timeframe. And it said essentially that they have a friend that's high-ranking in FEMA or the military, and they're going to kick the doors in and lock the entire country down. And that's what led us to start saying, well, this is a core Homeland Security problem. I was getting calls from private sector leaders, chairmen and chairwomen of companies, CEOs, you name it, public sector, and people are really concerned about that. That was 100% a foreign influence, misinformation, disinformation campaign. And that led us to the vaccinations, like you said, and really across the board, some of the unrest that we've seen over the past year and a half. So at our website at njohsp.gov, we've got a dedicated webpage towards combating the disinformation and misinformation. And again, we see this now in New Jersey as a core Homeland Security discipline and problem set that we have to deal with and counter that narrative by being trustworthy, transparent, direct with the information. We are an apolitical organization. We fight to maintain that apolitical nature, and we do that through, again, those mechanisms.
Thank you so much for your answer, and thank you, Chair Demings, for indulging his response.
The gentlewoman's time has expired. Thank you. Cybersecurity is one of those areas when we think about what keeps us up at night. I would say cybersecurity does. It is certainly the new weapon of choice. And Governor, in the fiscal year 2021, the department added transnational crime and cyber threats to the threat portion of the grant risk formula, and to the vulnerability piece of the formula, it added isolation to try and better account for more remote locations that nevertheless are at risk, particularly at this time of heightened domestic terrorism. Governor, in your view, do you think these changes help to more accurately reflect the current threat landscape? And if not, why not?
Thank you so much for that question, Chairwoman. It definitely does improve the threat landscape. As Representative Meeks had asked, the cyber threat is a nationwide threat because we're all connected. We are definitely seeking and encouraging the Congress to dedicate a stream of funding to cybersecurity. We are seeing more sophisticated threat actors. As Mr. Maples had commented, we have nation state threat actors using misinformation campaigns to confuse the residents across all 50 states and territories. And it becomes more important that these international actors, and I think the real threat to the American way of life is no business is really prepared to deal with these nation state actors. They are becoming more sophisticated. The cyber terrorists from out of country have access to the networks within our country. And I think most importantly, the weakest link in the network is where those cyber actors, those bad actors will enter the network and wreak havoc. So even the smallest county, the smallest business who now has been encouraged to embrace the technology and being part of the network can become the weakest link and the area of attack. So I do think it's very, very important. This change is important to recognize the nature of the cyber threat all across the country.
Thank you so much, Governor Ige. And Chief Altman, I know you talked earlier about grant applications and how some of the smaller agencies just don't have the resources and how you're working together. Could you talk just a little bit about how you're working together to address cyber threats to the agencies in your region?
Thank you, Ms. Demings. As far as us working together, we have obviously our IT departments are working, and we have to do training. We have a weekly training, and we have a monthly training where we all meet and get together and address whatever threats that are coming through for cyber training. Our department has put a certain budget together, and our cities put a certain budget together just to maintain and fight against cyber threats. For, like I said, ransomware has become something that's very, 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 very real. And just like to get this up so I can do this meeting on this, I had to go through our police department and make sure that the computer didn't have anything that was going to affect us for cyberware. So we've actually been held accountable on our city side with somebody for some ransomware just recently. So our department works with our neighboring cities and counties, and we have a joint commission that works for cyber security.
Chief Rolon, I know you spoke earlier about the City of Orlando's commitment to this area. Anything else you'd like to add in the area of cyber security or cyber threats?
We have to make sure that whatever funding has been allocated or future funding that is needed to support this important portion of the grants system is there in order for us to be able to best prepare for potential attacks. And it's an ever evolving process, it's ever changing process. So the fixes of today may not be the fixes of tomorrow. So we have to have the right people to provide us the support and the right funding to have the equipment to counter these threats.
Thank you so much. The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from New Jersey, Ms. Bonnie Watson Coleman.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Thank you and Ranking Member for this hearing, and thank you for, I didn't know if you knew I was on. I was getting a little nervous. First of all, let me thank all the witnesses, not just for sharing your information with us and your concerns, but for the service that you render to the states and counties and municipalities. We're grateful for the work that you do. Mr. Maples, I'm Jersey proud. I'm very proud of the work that you're doing. I'm so glad that you kind of amended your interest in what were greater needs when you talked about community organizations and support to those. I'm very concerned about the UASI grants. Madam, I don't know if I'm causing the feedback, but so I know that there was a proposal.
If the gentlewoman would suspend, would all members just make sure that you are muted? Please make sure you're muted. The gentlewoman may proceed.
Thank you. Oh, it's much better. I know that the Trump administration had proposed increasing the eligibility of UASI grant recipients, and at the same time reducing the amount of money that was going to be available. Had that happened, what would that have meant materially in the state of New Jersey? That's one question. And number two is, I know we've got cybersecurity issues. I know we have nation state issues. I know we have foreign attack issues, but it is clear that we have white supremacy attack issues. And with that in mind, are we looking to bring in faith-based communities that didn't necessarily weren't necessarily vulnerable to foreign terrorists, but would be very much targeted from white supremacists, and that would be the Black churches in particular?
And thank you, Congresswoman, and thank you for your kind words, and both great questions. So number one, the loss of dollars and an increase in applicants would definitely have a huge impact in New Jersey. We, as you know, are again one of the most diverse states in the country, and that also extends to our religious community and also throughout our community action and nonprofit community that are eligible for those grant dollars. And so we're advocating more eligibility, but a lot more dollars to be commensurate with that side, because the loss and the impact would be we just wouldn't be able to get as many dollars directly to a synagogue or a church or a temple or any of those other organizations that are out there, because, well, I mean, clearly we just lose the funding aspect of that. So we really rely on these dollars in our state to be resilient, to prepare our communities across all the counties. One of the challenges has been the eligibility in all 21 counties. We don't necessarily have that from the federal side. That's an area where we'd love to see that expansion, and we're seeing that now. But the dollars have to go up, not down here, period, because those are used for cameras, locks, alarms, training, vital.
Yeah, go ahead.
And then as far as our faith-based communities, I love that you asked that question. It's something we focused on from day one. Some of our community leaders across all communities, but in particular the communities that you just mentioned, in our African American, Black communities throughout, we've had great leads and great impact in developing relationships that weren't there before through our Interfaith Advisory Council. So we have a 3,500 member council that has every religion in the state. All religions are documented in there and part of that group. And we leverage that to get those grants out there to make sure we're engaging directly with the community. But it's not just about us communicating out. It's about the community letting us know what issues are, so we can head those off before they become real problems.
Yeah.
So this question is something we focus on.
Thank you, because I'm very concerned about domestic violence in this country now, as evidenced by January the 6th and beyond. And so it is good to know that we are expanding our desire to contact and protect those additional types of churches and organizations. Madam Chair, I see the clock, but I don't know if I have a little bit more time because of what happened. If
30
I do,
seconds.
I'd like to ask.
30 seconds.
40?
30.
Okay. All right, Mr. Governor, I just wanted to know whether or not you agreed with the testimony of Governor Pritzker of Illinois last year when he said that the initial response to the COVID disaster was disastrous and the air bridge was another type of disaster. What was your experience in Hawaii and what is your experience now? And I thank you for the additional indulgence, Madam Chair. Thank you, Governor. If you'd be able to
Yes.
answer that.
Sure. Yes, I would agree with Governor Pritzker's assessment. And I think the real challenge for all the states was because there wasn't strong federal leadership, that all of the states were left to deal with the different aspects of the pandemic in a different way. I'll give you a personal example from the state of Hawaii. Access to personal protective equipment, and the chiefs of police and fire talked about, from a governor's perspective, having our frontline personnel not have access to PPE was just a poor choice. We did not want to see that happen. And what was happening is that small states like Hawaii had to increase our orders in order for us to get on the map. We kept getting outbid by California and Washington State and New Jersey for a critical PPE, and we couldn't access and purchase the equipment that we needed to protect our public servants. And that's just one example that the initial response was poor.
Thank you. I think we're definitely moving in the right direction here now to protect everyone. And Madam Chair, I yield back and I thank you for your indulgence.
Thank you so much. The gentlewoman yields back. I just want to make sure that we have recognized all members. There's any member who has not been recognized. I would just like to take a moment to ask our witnesses, COVID-19 was something we'd never seen before, which required us all to do some things we had never done before. And I'd just like to hear from each of you how it affected your work, your ability to work on grants and apply for grants, and also how has it been working with the federal government, and how can FEMA better support you? Governor Ige, we will start with you.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you so much, Chairwoman. I do think that the biggest challenge in responding to grant opportunities is that, for the past 14 months, everything has been all about COVID. So, all of the other kinds of grants and having to apply for grants in this kind of environment where we have an ongoing national emergency, I think is a challenge for all states. And so, that has made it difficult for the other parts of support that FEMA and the Department of Homeland Security provides. But I would like to say that the support that most states have gotten from FEMA has been very responsive. The uncertainty of funding and support for our National Guards, for example, not being able to count on how much federal support we would get. We are thankful that the Biden administration came in and guaranteed 100% cost match for all of the emergency activities from FEMA. Was a welcome commitment. It's hard to plan on not knowing whether we'll get no FEMA support, 100% FEMA support, or 25-75, and that's made it difficult for all states. Other than that, FEMA has been proactive and responsive to our needs. Most recently, we see a sea change in transparency and responsiveness from the Biden administration.
Thank you so much. Mr. Maples?
Thank you, Chairwoman. The impact was definitely great on all of us here in New Jersey. From dealing with it sort of on the forefront for the country as far as the amount of cases and deaths and issues that we were dealing with, but then also preparing for those multiple tiers. The good news for us is we've really focused on flexibility and our strategic implementation to deal with multiple threats or multiple incidents and issues at one time. We do that in partnership with our OEM colleagues at the Office of Emergency Management of the State Police. And then in doing so, have some of the relationships in place with FEMA and our regional representatives and everybody in place. So we were positioned to deal with it. However, I think that was a tsunami for all of us, in that whether you talk about PPE shortages, whether you talk about some of the existing other programs that are out there where all of a sudden our people are remote in dealing with some of those challenges. So it did impact us. I'm proud and happy to say that we were able to get through that. I think we've been almost at 100% of capability throughout this, with some hiccups, but we punched through those hiccups. And as the great philosopher Mike Tyson says, everybody has a plan to get punched in the face. We got punched, but we hopefully punch him back here in New Jersey. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Chief Rolon.
Yep, I think
Chief, you're muted. Okay, we can hear you.
Controlling that mute over there, but I have to say, this is one time when we have to give credit to the FEMA representatives that work closest to us at the local level. They were there, they were supporting us every step of the way. What happened above that at the federal level could be deemed a different story. But I'm telling you, the way that stakeholders work with everyone to support the needs of the public safety profession, and I couldn't be more proud of the men and women of police and fire who, knowing that they were risking their lives or their loved ones, went out there and did their job. They did not have the luxury to not respond to a call for service. They did not have the luxury to say, you know what, let me think about it before I take that call. They did so knowing that they were putting their lives at risk. So on a personal note, I would like to take this opportunity to recognize the members of public safety and the heroics that they performed during the COVID initial phase, where everyone, the unknown was dominating everything.
Thank you so much, Chief. And Chief Altman.
To copy the chief's comments, we were lucky we positioned ourselves with our local hospitals and our local health departments, and we were able to get a lot of PPE. And like you were saying, FEMA on the local level has been great to us. We were able to operate 100% throughout the whole time, never missed a beat. We obviously made adjustments in how we respond to calls and the amount of people we would respond and how we enter into homes or into nursing facilities. Our community has a lot of nursing homes and a lot of retirement communities, so that was a huge task for us. But on the local level, we were put in a position running a large amount of calls, but our members and our police and our fire, like I said, we're up to the task, and we never hit a level. We got close, like the chief said. We had some hiccups along the way, but we never missed a beat, and we were able to perform up to 100% our whole time. So we were really handed, and everything was handled on the local level very well. Thank you.
With that, I want to thank the witnesses for your valuable testimony and for what you do every day to make sure that we are ready and to properly respond to anything that threatens us. Also want to thank the ranking member and the members of this subcommittee for your questions. The members of the subcommittee may have additional questions for the witnesses, and we ask that you respond expeditiously in writing to those questions. Without objection, the committee record shall be kept open for 10 days. Hearing no further business, the subcommittee stands adjourned. Thank you all so much.